I had a splendid voice. In fact, I'd sing in opera if they'd give me my choice. I wrote to Oscar Hammerstein that I would be his star. He said, come down and sing for me, and I'll see how good you are. And I don't suppose I'll do it again for months and months and months. No, I don't suppose I'll do it again for months and months and months. I sang the wise old owl, and he left the room at once. So I don't suppose I'll do it again for months and months and months.
Welcome to episode 10 of the Recluse's Cookbook. We're not far from the end of this series, but that doesn't mean we're going to slow down now, and this episode is a real treat. My guest this time around is Michael Finkel, a journalist and author based in Park City, Utah. Michael has had quite a career over the past 3 decades. He had done it all, or so he had thought, until on the same day he got fired from the New York Times, he also found out a psychotic murderer by the name of Christian Longo had been using his name while being a fugitive on the run. Over the course of this episode, Michael takes us through his astonishing career. We discuss how he began, his interest in peculiar subjects just outside the mainstream choice, and what it is that makes him tick as a writer. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I give you Michael Finkel.
So, Michael, can you tell us who you are and what it is you're best known to the public for?
All right, Mike Finkel here. I mean, you can call me Michael, but really my friends call me Mike. I am a journalist and have been a journalist for a really long time, like 35 years. I'm 57 years old, so I literally wrote for my high school paper. I'm like... back in the days when people read their newspapers on paper and no one had a cell phone, I was a journalist and I've watched the landscape change. I'm not sure if I'm well known for anything. Journalists tend to not, we're not movie stars or anything like that, but I do, you touched on in our little chat earlier, I do really look for stories that hit that sweet spot that are both true. And when I say I'm a journalist, I mean, I really like... these aren't stories that are based on a true story or kind of a true story. They really are 100% true and thoroughly fact checked. So I look for stories that are both true and unbelievable at the same time. You know, the cliche, the truth is stranger than fiction. So I really have a lot of good luck in finding very unusual people to talk to and to write about. And one of the things that makes me a spoiled successful maybe journalist is that I don't have any specific topic that I specialize in. I've covered wars. I spent a lot of time in Afghanistan. I spent a lot of time in Israel and the Palestinian territories. I've written about science, adventure, travel, everything from skiing to mountaineering, and criminals and crime all the time. But really anything that sort of grabs my attention is worthy for me to write about. So I'm very fortunate that I've had such a long and varied career, and that I'm with plenty of ups and some downs as well, which I'm happy to talk about. I've written about them. Not all successes for sure. Some big face plants and, got fired from the New York Times, many, many ups and downs. Like, I think anybody who lives to be a certain age is not going to have, I don't think there's also any such thing as just a success after success. No, especially in writing, failure and success. And so, I'm always happy to speak about, the stuff I've written about, but I sometimes feel that I don't really have great answers. It's like, so much of writing is based on, there's not like an instruction book. Here's the first sentence. Here's what you do the next sentence. It's really a lot of feel and sort of good fortune. And anyway, I've babbled on long enough. That's who I am.
So, like, where does it all begin, Mike? Were you always interested in writing and telling stories, or was it something that you kind of just fell into? Like, in terms of how did you get going? I think is. Because that's what I've noticed from talking to like students as I work in training solutions. The knowledge is taught to them, but how to get going or how people got started in a certain industry always makes them very curious, because there's never kind of one answer. There's many different types of ways you can get going. How did it begin for you?
Yeah, I'm a fortunate person. I've always felt that. I have lots of friends who even now in middle age are like, I wonder what I'm going to do when I grow up. Or every job I've ever had has sort of bored me. Well, I'm very, very fortunate. Once, many years ago, my mom showed me a journal that I kept at age 10, which is pretty rare unto itself for a 10-year-old to be writing things down. And I noticed in the journal that I wrote, which is very unusual for a 10-year-old, and I said, when I grow up, I want to be a writer. Who says that? Now, the next sentence did say, and if that doesn't work out, I would like to be a, quote, mad scientist. But yes, so I've known all along that really I like to express myself through writing, not photography or film. And if you had asked me in high school what it is I wanted to do when I grew up, I would probably say I'd like to have everybody else's job for 1 week. As in, my mind is all over the place. And in a weird way, that's sort of what journalism is. I get to experience so many, as I touched on earlier, from war to sports to crime, to deep science. I get to experience a lot of other people's lives and work. And so I do feel like I get to do a little bit of everybody's job. And so it keeps me interested. And to this day, 35 years later, I'm, well, 3 out of 4 days I wake up excited to get some work done. And 1 out of every 4 days, I just want to go skiing.
Yeah, it sounds like nearly like a typical job, doesn't it? It's like any job. It has its moments, but then there's the odd day that you kind of go, I'll put that down to being a day in the office.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they would if it was all that much fun, you wouldn't get paid for it. But yes, I have 3 children. They're all teenagers right now, and I have made my living through journalism. My wife is a teacher, so neither of us have great paying jobs. So yes, of course. Sometimes the motivation is completely external, like I got to pay the freaking rent, and that's just perfectly fine to get whatever gets you up in the morning.
So, can you remember your first assignment or the first job that you done? Could you take it, or was it like were you writing stuff and sending it in, or did you kind of get lucky enough that an editor says, "I'm going to take a punt on this lad now and get him in and see what he can
So
do"?
I mentioned I wrote for my high school paper, and
Yeah.
then I went to a university here in the United States in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. I went to the University of Pennsylvania, and they have a really good college newspaper that came out 5 days a week, and so I worked for that. And I remember my first paying job. Now, journalism has changed a lot. I think now you would probably have a blog or some sort of Substack. But at the time, there used to be a lot of free newspapers. You probably remember whenever you traveled to a city, this was I graduated university in 1990. So in the late 80s, early 90s, there's always these free newspapers with like,
Yeah.
oh, here's the music that's playing, here's the restaurants. And there would always be funny, weird articles. And there were a couple of those in Philadelphia. And they said, "Oh yeah, we need to anything you want to write that's strange or has to do with Philadelphia, we'll give you $20 per article." And I was like, "Great, that was beer money." I would write an article a week, and sometimes it would be. I sat in the last row of the football stadium, and with the worst possible seats. And who were the fans in the worst seats? I donated sperm to a sperm bank and wrote about what that was like. How do you donate sperm to a sperm bank? I wanted to see if I could stay in this was before the age of everything of Amazon. I wanted to see if I could have everything delivered to my dorm room for a week without having to leave. I interviewed, there used to be a magazine called Mad Magazine that was like a comic, and it was sort of funny. And I just was like, I love that magazine. I want to interview the editor of it, And so anything that came to my mind, even at that day, I got $20 per article. And then when I graduated college, instead of getting a real job, I was a waiter. I waited tables at a terrible Mexican restaurant and continued writing articles for as many newspapers and publications I can, like I said, usually at about $20 per article. So that was the very beginning. And a lot of times I would write something and then I would move over and the editor would sit there and edit it. And I don't know what it's like in this day and age, but that was my true education. Like, it wasn't like a give and take, like, "Oh, Mike, I think we should change the first line." He would be like, "First line's terrible. I'm cutting it. This is bullshit. We don't need this." And he would cut it. "We need to make this fit. I'm cutting this. I'm moving this." And I was like, and I watched a professional work and mess with my prose. And it was a really great learning experience. To this day, if you'll know, even my books are pretty short. I was raised with like, if you don't have something important to say, don't put it in. And so it was a weird sort of like I feel a little bit like a dinosaur telling you, or someone telling you about, oh, when I took the horse and buggy to work, but it was really like that. It was
Kind of like it's kind of, imagine it's kind of one of my favorite movies is All the President's Men, and I love those little scenes when they're sitting in the boardroom or they're sitting in the office, and you can't go with it. You got to. That's what it kind of sounds like,
you know what's funny? You never run out of pages on the internet, and so I often read things, and my first thought is, you could have cut that down a lot and said the same thing. But I think younger writers these days do not have someone sitting next to them. We only have a quarter of a page in a magazine for this article. Like that doesn't really exist anymore. It seems like I wish that, wouldn't it be funny if the internet had like a page limit?
Yeah.
And everybody, but anyway, so I don't think anybody's schooled in what I would call the art of brevity, which I was. And I still to this day really feel that people's time are valuable, and definitely you should enjoy a piece of writing, but don't over egg the pudding, as they say. Don't put too much in.
That's really interesting that you come up with that point. I've kind of had the same kind of theory there myself in the last, say, 10 or maybe 20 years. I'm a big film buff, and I love books, but movies in particular I just feel are just over bloated and too long now. You kind of lost me at 90 minutes. You know what I mean? Like, and I do feel that the art of editing, or how to self-edit, or someone to come in and edit, it's something that maybe I think it's going to make a comeback. Do you think it could?
Well, I mean, I don't know how many writers you talk to, and most of my friends are just my friends. They don't happen to be writers or not writers, so I don't really talk shop that much. But personally, I'll just say this. Yeah, I really love being edited. Like yes, of course, I have an ego and full of myself. When we talked about Irish mothers and Jewish mothers, exactly. I think my mother thought I hung the moon. But when it comes to my writing, it's not, I've heard people say, "Oh, my words are my children." Well, that's not true for me. I actually have real children. Those are my children. Like my words, you can move them around. We can cut them. We can try. Let's try the past tense. Let's try the present tense. Let's try a new, like, I love messing around with it. And a great editor to me is if someone says, "Mike, what's your secret for writing well?" And I would say, get a good editor. Everything that you've read of mine has been edited by a professional person who is really good at seeing the bullshit and the repetition and where the ego gets in the way. And to this day, I will pay money if like books these days are often lightly edited. I will hire a professional editor to give me their opinion. And then, of course, I'll bug my friends to do it for free, or exchange for drinks. But yeah, I really like feedback, and I'm not. I feel that the first draft is just a first draft, and like everything goes through a lot of steps. And so, if anybody's a writer out there who's listening to this, one of the beautiful things about writing, unlike this podcast where I feel like the second version, I would be much quicker and sharper, but you're just getting me raw here. Like, I really feel that a piece of writing should go through many iterations. And maybe that's part of the secret of it, is that I work it many times. I'll put it aside and let it rest for a couple of weeks or even months. And good editing is the secret to good writing.
So it sounds as if, like, although you started as a journalist and you are a writer, they are, as we are told, quite kind of isolating jobs. But it seems as if you really thrive off teamwork, like being in with an editor or maybe talking with other people in the office. Is that true to say?
I mean, definitely writing can be a very lonely. I mean, you sit in a room by yourself for hours at a time. But I'm also, as you mentioned, I'm not a novelist. I'm a journalist. So also part of my job is literally speaking to complete strangers and having long conversations like I'm doing with you, Vinny. And so, I had read this book, Quiet, by Susan Cain, when I was working on the book about the hermit, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And there's there's introverts, people that are, like to feel most comfortable being alone. And there's extroverts, people that like thrive at parties. But there was a third category that I didn't know about called an ambivert, which is someone who sometimes needs to be alone and sometimes loves to be around other people. And that's once I read that word ambivert, like being ambidextrous, two hands, I was like, exactly. Like if you see me, a lot of times, ask my wife, I'll love to go to a party and stay late and talk with every single person in the room, but other times I can spend 3 weeks in a row completely by myself in front of my computer struggling. And I told you I was a fortunate person. I actually like both of those parts of the job. I love the interacting with strangers and I love the complete isolation. So I'm very fortunate that really the job does appeal to me. One thing I do not like is having to punch a clock at 9 o'clock in the morning and have a boss telling me what to do. So I'm spoiled.
Yeah,
That way.
that's a wonderful word, ambivert. I've never heard that before, but it makes
Yeah, yeah.
so much sense because
Uh,
I would have want to be one of these that would have said pre-COVID, I would say, oh, well, I'm very much an introvert. I do like to be by myself and stuff like that. But when come lockdowns and whatever else had you, when I couldn't go into the workplace, I really needed the workplace. I kind of go, maybe I am an extrovert, but no, maybe under the classification, probably an ambivert in that sense that I do enjoy the periods of isolation. But then, like, I know every Monday morning, and this might sound sad, I'm kind of excited to get into the classroom and get teaching and messing with people and stuff like that, you know?
I love hearing things like that. That means you have a job that's really suiting you well. And of
Mm,
course, the problem with probably teaching and writing is that, neither of us are going to be rich
yeah.
men, but as I like to say, rich with experience. And in the end, maybe that's like I mentioned to you when we were chatting before starting this interview that I might go skiing right after we talk. And so how lucky is that in the middle of a Tuesday, um, a St. Patrick's Day, Tuesday, I can go for a couple of ski runs. I live right next door to a ski hill and then go back to work and my head feels really refreshed. Another thing about myself is that 90% of the body is below the neck and I cannot ignore that. I really need to exercise. I like to ski. I like to hike in the woods. I like to mountain bike or even just go to the gym. I feel it's really important to um, let the lower 90% of the body have its time and not just live in the between the ears. And so I'm also really lucky in that many of my articles have like I've gotten to climb some of the highest mountains in the world or gone on expeditions and used that physical ability to further my journalistic career. And so I really do like using the whole body. So ambivert, both love to talk to people and love to be alone. I can sit still and live a life of the mind, but I also really like to have an adventurous and physical aspect too. So a lot of contradictions sort of coming together.
So you did write a book about skiing, wasn't it? Alpine Circus, a skier's exotic adventures at the snowy edge of the world.
Well, I'm very impressed that you know that, Vinny. That was a product of my youth. Hilarious. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like where does ski? Again, was skiing something that was this like a local sport? Because like from someone from Ireland, skiing seems like such a luxurious thing that's we don't get to do very often. Like maybe 2018, March 2018, but like when the country came to a stop. But as you were there because you were here in Ireland. But where did that come? Where did that love of skiing come out of?
Yeah, that's funny. So yes, Ireland is, not known as the greatest ski nation. You have to go to Europe or all the Irish are in the French ski resorts as far as I
Yeah.
could tell. Um, so my parents both grew up in the middle of New York City. They didn't drive cars. They were in a big city people, but I can tell that my dad had like a weird curiosity about the countryside and about camping and about all those things he didn't get to do as a kid. And I'm the firstborn. I just have one sister. And when my father's only 24 years older than me, and my mom was only 22, so they were pretty young when they had kids. And my dad was like, "Oh, the I would like to go camping and I would like to go skiing." And it was sort of funny. The first day my dad ever went camping is the first day I went camping. I might have been 2 or 3 years old. The first day my dad ever went skiing was the first day I went skiing, and I was like 5 years old. And so it was really funny. So you think of your parents when you're young as being like, experts in everything. But this was sort of a weird bonding where I was a better skier than my dad almost right away. And it was like something that gave me confidence and I love to do. And I have a weird, oh, you live in Ireland, you know about bad weather. I have a weird love of bad weather. I can't even explain why. Like, I like snow and cold and wind and rain. It kind of is dramatic to me. And I fell in love with skiing at a very young age. I'm not good at it. I'm not going to the Olympics. No one's putting me on a ski movie. It's just a pure like love of speed and motion, and I like its danger. And to this day, I've convinced myself, and maybe my wife too, that a work day that consists of 5 hours of work and 3 hours of skiing, I will get much more done than just working for 8 hours. And I swear it's true. And even if it's not true, I'm going to swear it's true. And so I believe in getting outside. And during the warmer months, I love to ride my mountain bike. There's something about being outside. Yeah. And we can talk. This is going to lead beautifully into talking about The Stranger in the Woods, which is why I connected with this guy. I've always had a true love of the outdoors. In big cities, boy, I can have that's my ambivert. I can have a great time in a big city. I love to go to bars and restaurants and see theater and just talk to smart people and enjoy all the sensory overload. But that's not where I really want to. I can't write. I don't really want to live there. I really, for most of my life, have lived in the countryside with a beautiful view of snow-capped mountains. Where I'm talking to you right now from Park City, Utah. I live at about 7,500 feet above sea level, and we have a beautiful. I'm in the middle of the mountains, and it's just fills my heart with joy to this day.
So that brings us beautifully, like you said, to how I discovered your work. I wasn't aware of you as a journalist. Like, we're not that aware of we would have heard of newspapers in Ireland, of like New York Times or New York Post or Washington Post or whatever it was. Whatever we see in the movies, really, I think really kind of informs us. But I discovered your book, The Stranger in the Woods, The Extraordinary Story of the Last True Hermit. And it's one of these books. I don't do it very often, but once I got to the end of it, I went back to the start to read through it again to see had I just read what I read. Can you tell us, this is one of the most, like we said before we started, you have a knack for picking peculiar subjects. And this is probably one of the most peculiar, because as soon as I read it, I started researching it, and I thought, wow, this is like, how did I not hear of this story? How is not everyone writing about this? Can you tell us, first of all, tell us who Christopher Thomas Knight was and how he came to be a subject of your book?
Yeah, first, Vinny, I just want to thank you so much for reading the book and the kind words. You work on a project like The Stranger in the Woods, which I will tell you is about a man named Chris Knight who lived in the woods of Maine, which is in the northeastern part of the United States, of one of the really rural states in the United States. He lived all by himself in a camp tent, in a little camping tent, for more than a quarter of a century, for 27 years. He left the world completely at age 20 and did not have a conversation with anyone, did not talk to anyone else, survived by stealing food and clothing and reading materials, and was finally caught, apprehended at the age of 47. Imagine that, that's the heart of your life, from the age of 20 to 47, completely alone. And it was a fascinating little news story in the state of Maine. But I look for stories that aren't being covered by television or worldwide media, sort of one of those quirky small things. And I was like fascinated by just the little details that I had understood. 27 years camping, he had read or stole thousands of books and read them in his campsite. And I was like, man, two of my favorite things in the whole wide world are reading and camping. And this was like the grand champion of both. And he was being held in a jail for stealing from people's homes. And I was like, wow, I can only imagine someone who loves the great outdoors that much wonder what kind of mental torture is happened by being locked in a jail. Not that he didn't deserve it. He was guilty. But so I wrote him a letter, which is another thing that I really want to talk about briefly the art of writing a letter with pen and paper and stamps and envelope. It sort of feels very old fashioned, but I really like to reach out to people that way. Your phone never rings at a good time. You're always eating dinner or, doing something else. Nobody wants to answer their phone. You get too many emails, you just delete them. But a letter is so rare, and you can read and answer a letter whenever you want. So it's never like a bad moment. And I wrote him a letter in jail, and he wrote me back, and we started with that sort of old-fashioned letter writing. And then I was able to interview him, and I wrote a book. But one of the it makes me so happy, Vinny, to hear you say such kind things about it, because you work on a crazy project like that. And this is the part where like you're all by yourself, and I'm like, is anybody else going to care about this? Does is this just a complete? Is this going to be just like a book that only my mother reads? And so it turned out that I found Chris Knight to be both brilliantly smart and frustrating and strange and not he didn't even like me. And it's sort of funny, like as a journalist I'm like, I'm going to write about how much he doesn't like me, and I didn't know what the rules were. Like someone who's not spoken to anyone for 27 years, like how do you talk to them? And so part of the book is about me figuring out or making a bunch of mistakes and sort of being very open about that. And I didn't know if that would appeal to anyone at all. But as I mentioned, I had a couple of readers, I wrote a couple of drafts, but you still never know. So I want to just thank you for the kind words and for reading it.
Yeah, it's like I should like for Irish listeners, and we've got listeners from around the world, but Maine, it's not the most hospitable of landscapes at any time of the year, maybe. All I know about Maine is Stephen King is from Maine. That's about it. And then, yeah, and like he virtually survived on basically very little, didn't he? Like, I mean, these are winters that plummet well below zero. And I mean,
It is Maine is a challenging place. Long winters that have the worst kind of cold, very windy, and then the summers are very short and filled with mosquitoes, and so it's never an easy place. Um, Stephen King is from Maine. I take that as you will. Henry David Thoreau, the great naturalist writer, transcendentalist writer, American writer, he spent a lot of time in Maine and always wrote about how challenging it was, whether winter, very cold, and challenging summer, just being completely bitten by mosquitoes. And so this is a guy who lived out there without, I mean, like I said, in a tent in the woods for many, many years. And here's another thing, and he really found a place that he felt at home. This was obviously a person who was extraordinarily introverted, may have had a touch, may have been on the Asperger's or autistic spectrum. These diagnoses are hard to pin down. But one of the things that really captivated me about Chris Knight, the person I wrote about in The Stranger in the Woods, is that he expressed great pleasure about his life and wasn't being tortured, didn't regret that he escaped from the world, and in fact celebrated it and was quite upset that he was apprehended and forced to live with the rest of us. And so I found that sort of like subverting of so many things that we think of as normal. This person had sort of turned all that on its head. And I really feel that as a journalist, rather than condemn or judge, I really, truly, Vinny, like to listen and try and find our points of common humanity. And it was very challenging with Chris Knight, but I found that challenge and those interactions were rich and fulfilling. And the fact that he never really liked me, didn't really pretend to be my friend, I kind of appreciated that in a weird way, that he was completely himself in all of his difficulties, and yet still agreed to speak with me. We did like 10 or 11 interviews together.
Did you ever come to a conclusion as to why? Because like he just sort of kind of drove his car to a place, turned off the engine, and walked off. Like, did you ever kind of come to a conclusion as to how that came about, or it's like that's what I find fascinating about it. He's like, you read all these stories about these guys, and there's it always seems to be men too for some reason, but they go off and do it, and as you say, they're quite tortured and. They feel persecuted or whatever. I mean, your man was a guy that was in the cabin in Montana. Was it the Unabomber? Like he fell off the face of the earth. Like, whereas Christopher Knight wasn't that at all. It just seemed to be just one day walked out the door and into the forest.
Right.
And, did you ever come to a conclusion as to why he chose to do that? Or was he ever?
I like that question. So one of the things about Chris Knight, I touched on this just a bit earlier, is that he was 20 years old when he left the world. When you think about a hermit or the cliched version,
Hmm.
it's like some old man that's like, I'm through with this world, get away from me. But this was a 20-year-old who said that all his life, he had felt weirdly uncomfortable in social situations.
Hmm.
And as you said, just relatively randomly, one day quits his job and drives his car so deep in the woods that it's basically stuck and out of gas, and he leaves the keys in the console of the car, and without any planning, really without much supplies, like walks into the woods without a plan, without knowing how long he would be gone, and is away for more than a quarter century. Now you're asking why, and one of the things I really liked about speaking to Chris Knight, the hermit in The Stranger in the Woods, is that he never really played that game. A lot of why, like you can ask me about the arc of my life, and I will give you a nice, smooth story. But that is me as an older person, sort of looking back. In truth, I believe a lot of the things we do are kind of random, and we kind of make sense of it after. And also, a lot of us aren't. I'm not sure if this is the right word, but I'll just say it. Maybe a lot of us aren't brave enough to do what we really, truly want to do. And Chris Knight had this idea that he was going to just walk in the woods for however long, and didn't really have a plan, just knew that he was called, like felt this calling, like people feel to the priesthood or to religion. He felt this calling towards nature and did not know what was going to happen, and lived this sort of very present tense existence that I'm sort of impressed by. And so to answer your question in kind of a complicated way, but also honest, like I don't think that Chris Knight had a plan. It was very present tense, and in a way, it's almost more impressive that way. He didn't know what he was going to do, and that's as I like to say to my wife, the mystery that the day holds is what makes it worth living. If you told me everything that was going to happen tomorrow, the next day, and the day that I was going to die, I wouldn't really want to know that. I love that mystery. And so Chris really lived that very vividly, day by day. Didn't know how he was going to eat, survive, what was going to happen. And I found that almost impossible to get my head around, and also extraordinarily impressive, and very much a lot of the things that Chris Knight did that I write about in the book aren't for you to emulate. You're not going to go live for 27 years, but to sort of think like, am I living the life that makes me the most satisfied? All these distractions that are basically bombarding us, from telephones to, television to movies. Like, are we spending enough time getting to know ourselves, the only person you can really truly know? And so a lot of these great questions sort of are crop up while also telling a short kind of event-filled story. I don't know if I babbled too much, but that's
Well,
really
that's
what's up.
fine because it sounds as if he kind of used the day before, the previous day, to inform the present day, and then he didn't worry too much about the future. It just kind of, which I think is the most fascinating aspect of the personality.
Right. I worry about the future all the time. How am I going to pay my
Mm.
bills, and where my kid's going to go to college, and what am I going to do for retirement, and is it going to snow next week? But so I'm like stuck in that future and would love to be more grounded. And honestly, I don't think I touched on this, but one of the things I truly adore about being a journalist is that, yeah, I normally am asking the questions, but I feel like a tremendous percentage of the people that I meet enrich me in some way. I don't think I've ever met anyone who hasn't been able to teach me something about the world. Um, Whether it's how to fix an automobile or how to do brain surgery, like everyone has something. And so I feel very enriched by. Another reason why I like my job is that I love talking to people from all walks of life, hermits to thieves to explorers to soldiers. And I don't think there's any person I've ever met that hasn't been able to tell me something that I am happy to have learned. And
With
it's great.
regards Christopher now, so Chris Knight, um, Whatever happened to him? He's no longer in prison, I believe. He has left prison. So I mean, do you know how he's coping? So because it's very hard to find anything about where he is now. Are you aware of what
So
was?
this is the way it worked. The man left the world at age 20, spent 27 years in the woods, and unfortunately, he wasn't able to hunt and fish for his food. So he
Mhm.
broke into cabins, although in a weird way, the breaking in, it's almost more natural, as Chris Knight himself would say. If you leave your garbage can out, where I live in Maine as well, a bear will often come and take the garbage out. Well, why wouldn't that bear spend more time, going and trying to forage for berries? Because it's much more efficient to go into a garbage
Yeah,
can. When you live in outside nature, you really have to protect your energy and your source of fat and storage. Anyway, so Chris took the most efficient way, which was to take other people's food. He
yeah.
felt guilty about it. Anyway, he was caught stealing, put in jail for about 7 or 8 months that were quite torturous to him.
Yeah.
Finally, both sides, the state and his defense attorney, said this is clearly sort of an outlier human, where for which jail is not the right place. Was released, and as I mentioned earlier, Chris never really became my friend. He really truly is a hermit. He said to me, Mike, it's been interesting speaking to you, but now please, don't ever talk to me again. And I
Okay.
said to him,
Right.
but
Yeah.
Chris, and I said, Chris, will you do me a favor if you ever want to? I give you my word, Chris. You've been so amazingly forthcoming and sharing your story with me and allowing me to write about you. So if you ever want to get in touch, will you write me a letter? And he said I would. And the last time I spoke to him was 2016, so about 10 years ago. We have had no uh, we have had no communication since, and I doubt we ever will. But I do know, I kind of not really keep tabs on him, but
Mm.
I know so many people in the area. So Chris Knight is still alive and well and living in Maine and is not being disturbed by anyone and is keeping to
Mm.
himself, and has not yet returned to the woods. He's living in a small house in a rural part of Maine.
That was
And I
something.
wish him well. If he
Yeah.
listens to this podcast, Chris, if you listen to this podcast, I'd just like to share my gratitude. I mean, you've changed my life and opened my eyes, and the fact that you agreed to speak with me, I'm forever grateful.
It's interesting you say that because I've watched a couple of documentaries on him, and I wouldn't say they were accepting of the North Pond hermit, but they weren't protective of him either. But they kind of let bygones be bygones. The community, from what I'm hearing of what you said, like I mean, they leave him alone. He gets let to get on with it. They don't bother him. Like even in terms of media, there's very very little on it.
Yeah, I think Chris Knight, first of all, he has a good head on his shoulders. I think his lawyer told me that something like 500 journalists tried to get an interview with him. And this is one of the reasons why I'm so honored that he agreed to
Yeah,
speak with me. And I think Chris, in his own head, thought, you know what? If I don't tell my story to somebody, I'm going to keep getting hounded. And in a funny sort of way, he's like a chess player. He's like, if I tell my story to one person, it could sort of be like a little fence between me and the rest of the world. All right, here you can read about me. Now leave me alone. And I'm happy to report, to the best of my knowledge, that yes, it's exactly how it's happened. He's Curiosity seekers haven't come. It's he lives in a remote enough place that he's been left to the lifestyle that he prefers, and I think that the curiosity seekers can be sated by reading
yeah,
the book that I was able to write with his interviews. And I myself have thoughts all the time of, oh, I would love to stop by his place and knock on his door and say hello. And I will tell you, Vinny, right now, I will never do that. I gave him my word, and
yeah,
he doesn't want to see me. But of course, I'm curious,
yeah.
and so it's kind of funny. Uh, Relationships between journalists and subjects can take many different forms, and with Chris Knight, the Hermit, it was very clear that there were boundaries right away. That he was speaking to me because he felt that if he told a story, he might be left alone. And he also
Mhm.
had another reason, which is he wanted to really practice communicating after having so such a long time in which he didn't have to interact with anyone, and he thought that the letters that I wrote were in a way appealing or acceptable as a fellow outdoorsman, certainly not on his level.
Yeah.
But we did have, for a short period of time, we did have a little bit of a relationship, and
Yeah.
even, and I like I said, I'm richer for it, and I find Chris Knight to be extremely fascinating. If you're an extrovert, or if you're if you're the life of the party, you can still, I feel, gain from some of his insights. And so I really enjoyed writing that book. It was sort of a fun challenge. Again, it was one of those, I'm so surprised that actually anybody has read it. It's like, is this just like, literally, I'm writing a book about a guy who sat in a campsite and didn't speak to anyone for 27 years. No action, no dialogue, no events, and yet fascinating to me nonetheless.
Because you came to that point from a very, very different place. Because I go back to your second book here, True Story, Murder, Memoir, and I better get this right. Mea
Man.
culpa. Yeah.
Yeah, my fault. That's what
So
it means.
yeah, this kind of like in terms of, I don't want to class The Stranger in the Woods as true crime, but there's an aspect of it that
For
would
sure.
be, like a serial
For
burglar or
sure.
whatever you want to call it. But in terms of true story, this is when I got Stranger in the Woods and finished it, and I read what True Story was about. I says, well, now I have got to get this, and I was completely shocked as to what, because I can't think of this being but someone's nightmare. Can you take us through True Story? I think you're the better person to explain this, to be quite honest with you, than I
So
can.
in my career, I've almost always chosen what stories I want to write. True Story, my first real book, there was a collection of ski stories that you mentioned, really chose me. And so
Yeah.
I will explain very briefly. It's a little bit of an older book. It was published about 20 years ago in 2005. I was a high-flying reporter for the New York Times Sunday magazine, traveling the world, reporting on important stories. And as I hinted at earlier, I was fired from that job on one of my assignments in West Africa, writing about accusations of child slavery on cocoa plantations, cocoa being the chief ingredient in chocolate. So it was slavery and chocolate. Are your chocolate bars made by slaves? I talked to a bunch of very, very shy workers, and it was two translators. I had to go from the tribal language to more general language, and then to English and back. And they were very shy children, and told me a couple of things, and I combined a bunch of different people's quotes together, all real quotes, to make what's called a composite character against the rules of journalism, especially strict rules like the New York Times. Was caught for that and was fired and humiliated and embarrassed. And I thought I would never be a writer again, and I felt really ashamed. And literally the same day that the New York Times was going to run a little article saying we fired our writer, Mike Finkel, and it was going to be like the biggest embarrassment and maybe the end of my writing career, I get this strange call. And someone informed me that a man named Chris Longo, I'm like, who was wanted for 4 murders, not just any 4 murders, the worst 4 murders you can imagine. His wife and his 3 children had fled to Mexico. And someone's telling me this. I'm like, I'm about to be fired. Why are you telling me about this murderer? Anyway, this murderer who had escaped the United States and went to Mexico, had been telling everyone in Mexico, and this is true, that his name, remember, my name's Mike Finkel, his name was Mike Finkel, and he was a reporter for the New York Times. In other words, this murderer had took on my identity. I'm not making, it's like, if you make that up, it's kind of dumb because it's not even it's too unbelievable. But literally the same day that I lost my identity, I found out that some other guy had stolen it, and I'm like, I'm not really interested in murder and violence, but I was like, I need to talk to this guy and find out why he had taken my name. I'm not famous. He could have been Stephen King. He could have been someone famous, but he chose mine. And anyway, that started an incredibly fraught, intense, disturbing, fascinating, weird, horrific, you can put a million adjectives on there, relation. The first time I met this guy, Chris Longo, that's his real name, the murderer, he said, Mike, I've been reading your articles forever. I'm a big fan of your work. It was like maybe my only fan. He turns out to be a psychopathic murderer. And he says, listen, I know how I know that you lost your job, and I know that you're worried that you'll never be able to write again. But I'll tell you right now, I'm innocent, and I will prove it to you, and I'll give you the scoop of your life." And I'm like, "Okay, prove your innocence to me." And so thus started a very intricate, like I said, and disturbing cat and mouse game with a psychopathic murderer. He did not prove his innocence to me, and it sort of resurrected my career and started me on book writing, and also is a true story. And I was dealing with a pathological liar, and that's the reason why I called the book True Story, is basically a slightly tongue in cheek that the main character is a not just a murderer but also a liar, but also I had it extraordinarily thoroughly fact checked, so it is also literally a true story. Anyway, that was a long-winded answer, but yeah, what a weird thing to happen to a person, to be like sort of caught up in a crazy murder case while at the very moment when you most needed a story to resurrect your career, like the most spectacular one you can imagine, falls right in your lap.
I would think it's a journalist's worst nightmare to become the center of a story, would it not be? Like become the story, if you know what I mean.
I mean, I generally do it until
It's
that
just,
point. I occasionally wrote about myself in some adventures. At
but
that
I
point,
mean,
it was so bizarre and strange that I don't know. I was never, I was always, to this moment, like I told you, it's been 20 years. I'm morally uncomfortable about the whole thing because I
mm,
was in a weird way like grateful to this murderer for choosing my name and giving me a chance to write something. And so, but I hated, I wished every single moment of the day he had not committed this crime. And so it was we can talk about this all night long, which we
mm.
won't, but it's basically a very uncomfortable, morally unclear story that I felt compelled to put on paper, and I almost feel I don't know. I feel bad for all the readers that might read it. I don't know what to tell you about it. It's like if I see anybody reading that book, I'm turning around and going the other direction. I can't even see it.
Because it starts kind of like you've again we're talking about true lines. The true lines of your book seem to be about the subjects seem to be again a great. Is it Latin? Is it mea culpa?
Mea culpa
Uh,
just means my fault, my fault.
yeah,
It,
it's because in terms of like if you put the three subjects, and we'll get to the third book now, the art thief. They are all pretty much they end up in the place they're in via mea culpa. You know what I mean? Christian Longo murders his family. Christopher Knight made a decision to go into the woods, but his survival tactic was to burglarize houses that were empty, I should add. Hence, he ends up in prison. And then we've got the art thief, which again, when I read it, I was like, wow, how did I miss this one? It was like, was it Stefan Brettweiser? Am I getting that right?
yeah, Stefan Breitwieser, right? I
Yeah.
lived with yeah. So that's my newest book, The Art Thief. And again, they all are loose. They all can be categorized as true crime in a way. So I'll briefly speak about The Art Thief. Thanks for bringing it up. Yes, I lived with my family in France for almost 7 years. My children speak, unlike their father, speak beautiful French. And the reason why you might not have heard of Stefan Breitwieser is he doesn't speak English. He's
Okay.
a French art thief, and I did all my interviews, in fact, all of the research, in French, which was a great way to introduce him to. He's a little bit known in France itself, but in a nutshell, he stole probably more works of art than any single person in history. Is like armies and the Nazis stole plenty of art, but he stole more than 300 works of art from 200 different museums and just hung it in his bedroom to enjoy it. So I was like, wow, a thief who's also an art lover, morals, like where is all over the place. And so I found it to be really fascinating. And again, you know how I first got in touch with him. We talked about this. I wrote him a handwritten letter. In this case, it took him 2 years to respond to me. So we wrote some letters back and forth. And then I was able to meet Stefan Breitwieser and interview him. And he was like, sometimes the world opens when you're a journalist. Like I thought he would be very shy and not want to talk about it. But once he started talking, it was as if he couldn't stop and really wanted to share, like literally all the details of his crimes. And then, of course, I talked to the police and his girlfriend. I tried to talk to his girlfriend. I got all the, court transcripts, and I really, again, it was like one of those stories that's like both true and sort of unbelievable. And I think you said before you can just call your books all true crime, and I agree with that. But I also think that when I look for a topic for a book, there's like two things in my mind. There's like the story, like a guy who stole a bunch of art, a guy who lived in the woods for 27 years, a guy who murdered his family. There's the story. Then there's like, what's it really about? And as we touched on in The Hermit, it is like, are we spending enough time alone getting to know ourselves? It sort of touches on that. With The Art Thief, it's like, what do you find beautiful, and why does something, what will you do for beauty? Like, what do you find the most beautiful? Is it a sunset? Is it a lover? Is it a Picasso? Like, what makes you fall in love with something beautiful? What is that? What is that emotion about? And then with the murderer, it was like talking about what is the importance of telling the truth or being a liar, and the results that can come from dishonesty, and sort of like there's the theme and then there's the story, and I that's when I'm choosing a book project, I like to have both of those things sort of working at the same time. I'm working on a new book now, which we could talk about, that has that sort of same idea.
So this is coming closer because it kind of runs in with what I was about to ask. Like, I mean, there's 12 years between your first book and the second book, and there's like 10 years between. That's nearly a theme in this podcast because I had Toby Harrington on as our second guest of this series, and he's got 3 books as well, pretty much the same, nearly at the same kind of time period. What is it? Just because it's the topic, and do you exhaustively research it and then edit it down, or is it how you just don't look for it and then bang, it hits you, and then you write furiously? That explains like the time, or.
Couple things to say about that. First of all, I literally make my living as a journalist, so I will be writing magazine articles and small pieces constantly to keep the electricity on.
Yeah.
But when it comes to like a book project, boy, I love to read. I mean, I read obsessively, but when I walk into a bookstore, I never think, there's not enough books in the world. There's too many books in the world. If nobody publishes another book, for now to the end of time, my bedside table will still be, stacked until the day I die. So we don't need any more books. So I'm very conscious of like not releasing anything unless I really feel that it's worthwhile. And and so this takes a long time, and call me old fashioned and weird, but like, if I'm going to bother to put together a book, I'm going to give it my absolute best effort. Now you might hate it, of course. I mean, yeah, it's everybody's right, but I really feel that they're like, I was going to say sacred objects, but I don't know if maybe a second draft would be better, but books are really important to me. And to put my name on one, I feel that it has to be it has to be something a little different. It has to be just the right amount of strangeness. And like I told you, the way I write, they have to be completely true. I hire independent fact checkers to go through everything. So it's a real process. I wish that I was faster. I wish that I were able to make more money. Let me just be honest with you. But I really take the.
At least you're honest.
I can't take my heart out of it. You know what I mean? I'm not able to just like write a book every year just because I can get paid for it. And I really take them seriously. And so they're long, involved, ridiculously inefficient projects, but it's just part of my makeup. Like that, I just believe like that you shouldn't just write a book for the heck of it. It should have some importance and some thought behind it.
You strike me as someone who's very methodical and passionate, but you crave information. Would that be fair to say?
I'm hard to live with, man. I'm telling you right now. It's like, I have a busy head. That's one of the reasons why I really like to go skiing, because it's one of those moments where I worry about the war in Iran. I worry about the project I'm working on. I worry about my 3 children. I worry about how I'm going to pay the bills. It's like a lot of things going on, and then I feel compelled to read I got a stack of books everywhere. And so, yeah, uh, busy head. I make, I try to live, as best, with the best moral intentions and try and be a good father and good husband and good journalist. And I fail at all those things pretty much every day, but I give it my best shot. And then sometimes, like I said, being human, I will just like toss everything up in the air, put my ski boots on and go just down the slopes for an hour and just like nothing really matters. You know what I mean? Life is short. Nobody gets out of it alive. The purpose of life is not to do good work, but to satisfy yourself and maybe the ones around you.
So, as you mentioned, there might be a new book coming soon. What can you tell us about it a little bit, or are you sworn to secrecy? Or
I'm not sworn to secrecy, but it certainly won't come out anytime soon. But
okay,
it's sort of another true crime-ish book, but it takes place in the world of hallucinogenic drugs.
oh,
And
interesting.
I'm not sure if you ever saw the television show Breaking Bad about a guy who
Oh, I
lived
did. Yeah, yeah.
basically two lives. He was making meth, but also was a father. But that is fiction. That is not true. But the story that I'm sort of interested in is someone who did live two lives. He made almost all of the acid, the LSD consumed in the world. He was one of the great acid chefs in the world, but at the same time, also had a rich life in academia, was affiliated with Harvard, worked for the State Department, was like this renowned expert in addictive drugs, and so lived in these two worlds, and is now quite an old man, and has given me a few interviews and sort of fascinating about, and also the sort of arc that hallucinogenic drugs have had. Started out as this amazing breakthrough that they thought would end a lot of psychological ailments, and then became completely illegal.
Okay.
People put in jail for life, and now it's come around again to re-examining the therapeutic uses, and so it has a bunch of little angles. Anyway, don't hold your breath, people. But within a couple of years, I hope to have a book out about the modern day Walter White Breaking Bad. But this is a true story, not fiction.
Okay, I'll ask you one last question, and
Please.
kind of this question has been creeping in, particularly because I love reading, and I love writers, and I love chatting to them, and kind of I suppose the career goal for me would be to write and publish a book in the future. So, but I'm not the only one. There's loads of people. So, what advice would you have for any budding journalists or writers going forward, particularly first timers?
Okay, we've talked about a few of these things, and I'm just going to go over it. You have to write. First of all, if you're a writer, you have to read a lot. You just have to read a lot. If you don't like reading, that's really strange to me. So just read a lot. And then I mentioned before that you might think that writing is a solo activity, but in fact, you need to have good editors or at least friends that can write about. But let's put all that aside. If you want to write something, I feel like you should feel quite passionate about that. Like if you're just like, I want to be a writer, I'm going to write about whatever, I'm going to write about football or rugby, but I don't really care about it. That's just going to be terrible. There has to be some passion. You have to feel that you have something to say. And now the last thing I'm going to say about this, way easier said than done, but you have to write like yourself. And what I mean by that is, I know people who are like, oh, I'm going to write now. And so I'm going to use all these crazy big words. I'm going to use a thesaurus. Like I'll read something and I'll be like, Vinny, that doesn't sound like you at all. I just spoke to you for an hour. I know who you are. You're really like this. What I'm reading on the page is some other person. It took me years of writing to write like myself, even though that sounds funny. And so one of the things that I do when I start writing first draft, I call it the bar room test. I'll either literally do this or just imagine it. Like, Vinny, you'll be sitting next to me at the bar. We'll have a pint, and you'll say, Mike, what's your book about? And I will never say to you, oh, the sun is setting in the west like a golden. Nobody starts a story like that. I'll be like, man, there was this guy who's making all this acid, in the middle of Kansas in the 1980s, and I'll like pretend I'm having a conversation, or I will have a conversation at a bar. And like, that's the way I'll like to write. Like whatever you would tell a friend at a pub, is maybe the way you should start writing, like very naturally. Speak like yourself. Write that all down. And one of the beautiful things about writing, as we discussed during this conversation, is that you can do another draft, but just write naturally, write passionately and write naturally. And those are easy to say and hard to fulfill. One of the things that I do when I'm writing a first draft, and it takes me sometimes a couple of hours of my day, is to silence the critics. Oh, these people are going to hate this. This is not what people want to read. And just shut everyone out and just write what comes naturally. Way easier said than done, but it's what I mean. Don't write like Shakespeare. Don't write like Hemingway. Don't write like James Joyce. Write like yourself. Hard to say, hard to do, but it is essential. And that's what I got to say.
So that's my interview with Michael Finkel. Please see all links relating to Michael and his work down below and check them out. You will not be disappointed. We'll be back in a fortnight with our next guest. Until then, please like and share where and when you can. Until the next time.